The loud thud of the van door slamming shut echoed through the cold, dimly lit alley. The black hood still obscured her vision, but the harsh grip on her arms told her everything she needed to know. She was trapped. "No. Please, I didn't steal anything," she screamed, her voice raw and panicked. A hand shoved her forward, and she stumbled, almost falling to her knees. "Quiet," a deep voice ordered in flawless English. She could barely breathe. Her heart raced, her mind spinning. All of this, the pain in her back, the exhaustion from working the night shift, everything had led to this moment. The precious diamonds, the ones she had found, the ones she had so foolishly thought could change everything. They were a trap. Jade Thompson never should have picked up that velvet pouch. She was 7 months pregnant, a janitor at a high-end casino in the middle of Seoul, and in the blink of an eye, everything had turned upside down. Now, standing in the back of a black van, feeling the cold sweat run down her spine, she realized that what she had thought was a simple mistake was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Her thoughts flashed back to the moment she found the diamonds. Jade's sneakers scraped against the marble floor of the casino's private hallway. It was late, the usual high-rolling crowd had mostly dissipated, leaving only a few stragglers. The building felt quieter than usual, and for once she didn't mind. The clattering sounds of the slot machines were replaced by the hum of the air conditioning, and the only light came from the flickering bulbs above her head. Her feet hurt. They always hurt. The hours spent scrubbing floors, cleaning bathrooms, and picking up after the rich and famous weighed on her. But it was the only work she could get. She was used to it. But tonight, something felt different. She had been mopping the floor near the private elevator when she saw it. A small, black velvet pouch, half hidden beneath the lip of a Ming vase. It was almost like it was waiting for her to find it. She shouldn't have touched it, but her curiosity was too strong. She bent down and picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Inside, she could make out what looked like diamonds. Not just any diamonds, though. Uncut, raw diamonds. Diamonds worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. The pouch was almost too heavy to hold, and it tugged at her chest like an answer to all her problems. She could have walked away. She should have walked away. But instead, she slipped it into her pocket. "I'll return it," she whispered to herself. Maybe someone would thank her. Maybe she could even get a reward. Maybe she could use that reward to rent a real apartment before the baby came. She had dreams of living somewhere that didn't smell of old takeout and bleach, where the walls didn't close in on her at night. She needed a fresh start. It was a fatal mistake. An hour later, Jade was in the staff locker room, tying her sneakers when the door swung open without a knock. 3 men in black suits walked in. Their leader had a dragon tattoo snaking up his neck, and his eyes were cold, like shards of obsidian. "Miss Thompson," he said in perfect English, "the boss wishes to thank you personally for finding his property." Jade's heart sank to her stomach. She wasn't stupid. She had seen enough movies to know this wasn't a friendly thank you she was about to receive. She was in trouble. "I was going to turn it in," she said, her voice shaking. She wasn't a thief. She wasn't even trying to steal anything. The leader didn't answer. He simply extended a gloved hand. "We'll take it now." Something was terribly wrong. Jade hesitated, the pouch weighing like lead in her pocket. It felt like a noose, tightening around her chest. Before she could react, a thick black hood was yanked over her head. She screamed, but her voice was muffled. Panic surged through her, and she kicked out, the sharp pain in her swollen belly making her wince. "Careful. She's pregnant," one of the men snapped. "Let's get her to the boss," the dragon-tattooed man said coldly. They lifted her from the ground like she was nothing more than a rag doll. The world spun as they carried her out of the locker room, through the service exit, and into the night. She could feel the cold air biting at her skin. Every muscle in her body screamed for escape, but there was nowhere to run. Her thoughts raced as the van sped through the streets of Seoul. The windows were blacked out, and the van swerved through narrow alleys, taking turns too fast for her to keep track of. Her heart pounded in her chest as fear coiled around her like a snake. It didn't matter how fast the van drove. It didn't matter how far they went. This wasn't just about stolen diamonds. This was about something far worse. The van finally screeched to a halt, and the doors opened with a slam. The hood was ripped off her head, and she found herself face to face with a cold, concrete underground garage. Black SUVs lined the walls, and armed men in suits stood at attention like statues. In the center of it all, leaning against a gleaming Maybach, stood Kong Jinho. She had heard the name. Everyone in the building knew who Kong Jinho was. On the surface, he was the charismatic owner of the Diamond Lotus Casino. But behind closed doors, whispers followed him. They called him the head of the Black Lotus Syndicate, one of the most ruthless crime families in all of Seoul. Kong Jinho was a man who smiled for the cameras, but his eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating, predator's eyes. And now, he was looking at her like she was nothing more than a pawn in his game. "Miss Thompson," he said smoothly, his voice calm and collected. "Thank you for returning my diamonds." Jade couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. She was no thief. "I didn't steal them. I found them. I was going to turn them in," she stammered, her voice breaking. Kong didn't flinch. His eyes never left her as he slowly took the pouch from the man at his side, spilling the diamonds into his palm. "These are fake," he said quietly, his voice sending a chill through her. Jade's stomach dropped. "Fakes," he said again, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Excellent fakes, but fakes nonetheless." Her head spun. This wasn't a simple case of returning lost property. She was caught in the middle of something far darker. "This was a trap," Kong said, his voice low. "You weren't the thief. But now you are part of a much bigger game." Her breath caught in her throat. This was no accident. She had been used. The ruthless Mafia in Seoul had planned everything. They had baited her in, using the diamonds as a trap to lure in a thief. But she wasn't the thief. She was the mark. She was the pawn, and now she had no idea how to escape. Kong studied her like a butcher eyeing a cut of meat. His gaze pierced through her, and Jade knew she was in more danger than she could have ever imagined. But there was one thing she could be sure of. If she didn't do something fast, this night would be her last. The sharp scent of fresh pine needles filled the air as Jade was shoved out of the van and into the cold, sterile underground garage. The bright fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting an eerie glow on the row of black SUVs parked like sentinels. Armed men in dark suits stood at attention, their cold eyes never leaving her for a second. She was surrounded. The muffled sound of her breathing was the only thing that broke the suffocating silence. They had brought her here, deeper into the heart of whatever game they were playing. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She was pregnant, trapped, and now caught in the web of the most dangerous men in Korea. Kong Jinho was standing in the center of it all, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair slicked back neatly, and his posture was casual, almost like he was the king of his domain. But it was in his eyes, the coldness, the calculating way he regarded her, that made her feel like prey. The hood had been ripped off her head, and now Jade stood there, exposed and vulnerable, as Kong slowly walked toward her, his every step measured and deliberate. He came so close that she could feel the cold of his presence, the weight of his power. Her throat tightened as she swallowed, unable to look away. "Miss Thompson," he said softly, his voice smooth as silk, but it carried an edge to it that made her stomach turn. "I believe we need to have a conversation." His men moved aside as he gestured toward a steel door on the far end of the garage. The door opened, revealing a sleek elevator that looked as cold and sterile as everything else in this place. Jade's breath hitched. They were taking her somewhere. Somewhere that felt wrong. She had been hoping that maybe this was all some mistake. Maybe she was just a pawn in a bigger scheme that didn't concern her. But deep down she knew. This wasn't a mistake. And she wasn't going to get out of this easily. One of the men in suits approached, gesturing for her to walk toward the elevator. His hand was firm on her elbow, guiding her forward as if she had no choice. She tried to resist, but the grip tightened. "Move," the man commanded, his voice low but forceful. Jade didn't struggle. She couldn't afford to. Her mind raced as she walked toward the elevator. What had she gotten herself into? How could she fix this? But no answers came. Only fear, and the cold reality that the only way out of this mess might be through survival. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and she was shoved inside. Kong followed, his eyes never leaving her. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent, taking them up higher into whatever dark corner of Kong Jinho's empire awaited her. The silence in the elevator was suffocating. Jade wanted to say something, anything, but her throat felt dry, and the words just wouldn't come. She wasn't sure what she was more afraid of, the man beside her, or the terrifying unknown that lay ahead. Kong stood there, leaning casually against the wall, as if he was merely taking a ride, his expression unreadable. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't worried. He was confident, and that made everything feel even worse. The elevator stopped, and the doors slid open once more. This time, the space in front of them was much more lavish, an expansive penthouse that could have been the crown jewel of the city. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light, and a large chandelier hung from the high ceiling. It was luxurious, but the wealth of it only made Jade feel smaller, more out of place. She stepped out of the elevator, and immediately, 2 bodyguards flanked her, their eyes sharp and alert. She didn't know who they were watching more closely, her or Kong, but she could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. "Welcome to my home, Miss Thompson," Kong said smoothly, as though this were any ordinary meeting. He motioned to the vast living space, his gaze cold. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here." Jade didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind was too clouded by fear and confusion. She had walked into a nightmare, and now she was trapped in it. Kong walked further into the penthouse, his shoes clicking on the floor. He seemed completely unfazed, as though he owned everything in this space. And in a way, he did. She was just a piece in his game, and she knew it. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "I'm going to be blunt with you, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice lowering. "You made a fatal mistake by picking up those diamonds." Jade flinched, her hands instinctively moving to protect her stomach. "I didn't know," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't steal them. I was just trying to return them." Kong's lips curled into a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I know," he said. "That's what made you perfect." Jade's mind scrambled to understand what he meant. Perfect for what? The room seemed to shrink around her. She could feel the walls closing in, the tension in the air thickening as Kong walked toward her. His movements were slow and deliberate, every step calculated. "You were the perfect bait," he continued, his voice now an almost pleasant whisper. "A foreign woman, pregnant, with no one to miss her if she disappeared. No one would think twice about it. But you picked up the diamonds." Jade felt a chill run down her spine. "Bait," she repeated, her mind reeling. "You used me?" Kong nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You were the perfect decoy. I needed someone the thief would trust. Someone who wouldn't be suspected of working with me. Someone no one would look twice at. A pregnant janitor, working the night shift in a casino. You were my bait, Miss Thompson, and you played your part perfectly." Jade's chest tightened. She had been nothing but a pawn. They had been watching her, studying her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. And now they had her. She had no choice but to play along. But what was the price of survival? And what would Kong Jinho do next? Jade was led deeper into the penthouse, past rooms that were more luxurious than anything she had ever imagined. The kind of wealth she could only dream of. There were no windows here, just walls adorned with modern art and towering shelves filled with books and expensive trinkets. It felt like a prison made of gold. Finally, she was brought to a spacious bedroom, where the 2 bodyguards stepped back, leaving her alone with Kong. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at her, like he was sizing her up. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, his tone still calm but carrying a hint of something else. "You'll be staying here for a while." Jade didn't sit down. She couldn't. She just stood there, her hands clutching her belly, unsure of what was to come. "You're not going anywhere," Kong said, as if reading her thoughts. "Not until I say so." A heavy silence followed his words. It was the silence of a man who held all the power, who controlled every move she made. Jade had no choice but to wait, and pray that somehow she would find a way out of this mess before it was too late. The days blurred together in a haze of silence and tension. Jade woke every morning to the cold, gleaming walls of the penthouse, a place that now felt less like luxury and more like a gilded cage. The room was spacious, but the emptiness of it only emphasized her isolation. The city skyline outside the window was a reminder of everything she could never have: freedom, safety, peace. Instead, all she had was Kong Jinho, a man who had used her as a pawn in a game she never wanted to play. Each day followed the same pattern. Kong kept her close, though he rarely spoke to her unless it was to give her an order. His men, including Yoon Ji-hoon, watched her like hawks, ensuring she didn't try to escape or do anything foolish. She had no phone, no way to contact anyone. Even the simplest act of reaching for a glass of water felt like a risky move in this house of mirrors, where every corner was watched, every action scrutinized. But Jade wasn't stupid. She knew what she had to do. She had to bide her time, learn as much as she could, and wait for an opportunity to make her escape. She was pregnant, and every instinct in her told her to protect herself and her baby. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger: justice. Kong had told her she was going to help him catch the rest of the rats, members of his organization who had been skimming money, stealing diamonds, and undermining him. He had made it clear that her cooperation wasn't a choice. Either she helped him, or she would be eliminated as a loose end. The game was rigged, and she was caught in it. The following evening, Jade was once again summoned to Kong's study. This time, she was expected to work for him in some capacity, though she had no idea what that would entail. The fear of what might happen was overwhelming, but there was nothing she could do but comply. She had to do whatever it took to stay alive, for the sake of her baby, if nothing else. The study was dimly lit, with shadows dancing across the walls as the only light came from the glow of the monitors that lined one side of the room. Kong sat behind his desk, scrolling through files on his tablet. His movements were efficient, controlled. His eyes never left the screen as she entered, but the moment she stepped in, he looked up, locking eyes with her. "Sit," he said, his voice smooth but firm. There was no question in his tone, no room for negotiation. Jade sat down across from him, her fingers instinctively curling around the arms of the chair. She felt small in this room, like a mouse trapped in a predator's lair. "You've been here long enough to know what's at stake," Kong began, his voice steady. "You'll be working the next phase of my operation. I need you to gather information, to listen, and to observe. You'll be attending a private meeting tomorrow night. The men who betrayed me are coming to the Diamond Lotus for a high-stakes game. You will serve drinks. Get close. Observe their interactions. They will talk. They will slip up." Jade's stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment where she had to make a choice. Follow Kong's orders, or risk everything by trying to escape again. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. "And if I don't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. Kong didn't flinch. His gaze was cold, calculating. "Then you don't leave this building alive. You'll be a liability, and loose ends get cut." Jade nodded slowly, the truth of his words sinking in. She had no choice but to play along for now. But she wasn't just going to be a passive participant. She would watch, she would listen, and she would find a way to use this to her advantage. The following night, she was escorted to the Diamond Suite, the luxurious area of the casino reserved for high rollers and exclusive guests. It was everything she had feared, opulent, excessive, and cold. The walls were lined with expensive art, the floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the air smelled faintly of cigars and expensive cologne. The sound of laughter and conversation mixed with the clink of glasses and the shuffle of cards. This was a world she didn't belong to, a world that had swallowed her whole without a second thought. She was introduced to the staff as one of the new servers, and her uniform was simple but elegant, designed to blend in with the other waitresses. Her swollen belly was the only thing that made her stand out, but the rest of her appearance was carefully controlled. She wore minimal makeup, and her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. As soon as she entered the room, all eyes turned to her, and she could feel the weight of their stares. They looked at her as if she were nothing but a servant, a tool to be used. Jade fought the urge to shrink back. She wasn't just a servant. She wasn't just a pawn in Kong's game. She had a voice, and she would find a way to make it heard. As the night progressed, Jade kept her eyes open, watching everything. The players at the table, the staff, the way they moved, the way they spoke. She listened closely, trying to catch any hint of information that could help her understand what Kong's next move would be. But nothing stood out at first, just normal chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glass. Then, her eyes locked onto a man across the room. He was tall, dark-haired, and wore a suit that screamed power. He was leaning in close to one of the other men, a high-ranking member of Kong's organization. Jade felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't know this man, but there was something about him that made her feel like he was watching her, studying her. She avoided his gaze, pretending to be busy with her tray of drinks, but her mind raced. Who was he? Why did he seem so familiar? And why did it feel like he was part of something bigger than she could understand? The night dragged on, and the tension in the room grew. Jade continued her rounds, but her mind was focused on the man with the dark eyes. She knew he was important to Kong's plans, or perhaps to the betrayal that was unfolding right under her nose. As she approached the table where he sat, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment. This was the moment that would change everything. The man caught her eye, and for a brief second, their gazes locked. "Beautiful," he said with a sly grin. "You must be a new addition to the staff. How far along are you?" Jade stiffened, forcing a smile. I'm due in a few weeks, she replied, her voice even despite the pounding in her chest. He leaned back, studying her for a moment, then smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. I'm sure you'll be just fine, he said smoothly, his tone dripping with something she couldn't quite place. Tell Kong I said hello when you see him next. I'll be keeping my eye on you. Jade nodded, forcing the smile to stay on her lips. The moment he turned away, her stomach dropped. She had to get out. She had to warn Kong. But how? And more importantly, who could she trust? As the evening continued, Jade's mind raced. Every part of her screamed that she was about to be caught in a trap bigger than she could imagine. She had no idea who this man was, but she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't working for Kong. And that meant the real game was just beginning. Jade's mind raced as she stepped back into the shadows of the Diamond Suite. The weight of the man's words lingered in her head like a poison, tainting every thought. He knew who she was. He had already sized her up, and now she was just another pawn on the board of a game that was spiraling out of control. The quiet hum of conversation and clinking glasses felt distant, muffled by the chaos inside her head. She had never wanted any of this. She hadn't asked to be pulled into the dangerous web of the Black Lotus Syndicate. She had just been trying to survive, working late nights at a casino, cleaning the messes of the wealthy and powerful, all while carrying her child. But now, survival wasn't just about making it through another day. It was about figuring out who she could trust, how to stay alive, and if possible, how to escape this nightmare. The man with the dark eyes had only just begun to unravel the tension that was building between her and Kong. He had spoken to her like a predator watching its prey, his gaze lingering just a moment too long, his words too careful. What did he know? Was he part of the betrayal? Or worse, was he working with Kong in some twisted game she couldn't yet understand? Jade's eyes darted across the room, scanning for any sign of trouble. The men at the poker table were still deep in their game, oblivious to her silent panic. The glasses were half empty, the atmosphere thick with tension. Her hands shook slightly as she set down the tray of drinks. It wasn't the first time she'd felt out of place, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she knew she was walking a tightrope with no safety net below. Jinho, Kong's right-hand man, appeared beside her. His presence was always like a shadow, silent and imposing. He had been keeping a watchful eye on her ever since she had been brought here, and Jade knew that he was aware of every move she made. He wasn't just here to supervise. He was here to ensure that she didn't make a mistake. You're doing well, Yin said quietly, his voice low and unreadable. Keep your distance, observe. Don't get involved. Jade nodded, trying to steady her breathing. I'm not getting involved, she whispered, more to herself than to him. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. Yun's eyes never left her, scanning the room as if waiting for something to happen. There was a hardness to him that made Jade wonder just how deep he was involved in all of this. He wasn't just Kong's enforcer. He was someone who thrived in the shadows, someone who knew how to make things disappear. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught Kong across the room. His sharp gaze met hers for a split second, and something in his expression shifted. A hint of something unreadable flickered behind his eyes, but it was gone just as quickly as it had come. Was it concern? Or was it something more dangerous? Jade couldn't tell, but it sent a chill through her body. The night stretched on, the game continuing with its usual intensity. Jade continued to serve drinks, her mind always circling back to the man with the dark eyes. She had caught a glimpse of him earlier in the evening, but now he was nowhere to be found. Had he slipped out unnoticed? Or had he gone somewhere with a purpose? She didn't know, but the nagging feeling in her gut told her that something was about to happen, something big. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to find a way out of this hellhole before it was too late. But she couldn't just run. She was too close to something important now. She had to play along. She had to figure out who the real enemies were, and most importantly, how she could survive this tangled mess. Then, her eyes caught movement at the edge of the room. The man, the one with the dark eyes, was back. And this time, he wasn't alone. He was talking to a group of men, their faces hidden in the shadows. Jade's breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of them. He was another high-ranking member of Kong's organization. What were they doing together? Why hadn't Kong told her about this? She leaned in, trying to overhear their conversation, but the words were muffled by the noise of the casino. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to know what they were saying. She had to understand what was going on. It wasn't long before Kong himself appeared at the table, his tall frame casting a shadow over the group. The room seemed to shift as he made his way through the crowd, the other men parting like the Red Sea. There was something in the way they moved when Kong entered, a mix of fear and respect that made Jade feel even smaller than she already did. This was his world, and she was just a player in it. She watched as he greeted the group with a firm handshake, his expression businesslike, but with an edge of something darker beneath the surface. He didn't smile, didn't make small talk. It was all about power with him. It always had been. Her eyes darted back to the man who had been watching her earlier. He was still there, still talking with Kong, still part of this twisted web. Was he working against Kong? Was he the real threat? Or was Kong the one she needed to fear? Her mind spun, the questions mounting with each passing second. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the noise. Laughter, but it was wrong. Too loud, too forced. And then, the man with the dark eyes turned sharply, his expression shifting from confident to something darker. "Miss Thompson," a voice called from behind her. Jade spun around to find Yun standing there, his eyes cold as ice. "Come with me," he ordered. There was no question in his voice. No room for debate. Jade's pulse quickened, and she had no choice but to follow him. They walked quickly, Yun's footsteps steady and sure, as if he had done this countless times before. Jade's heart pounded in her chest. What was happening? Was she being summoned to Kong? Or was something else going on? Yun led her through a narrow hallway at the back of the casino, away from the noise of the private game. The walls were lined with security cameras, and Jade could feel the weight of their gaze as they passed. It felt like they were being watched from all directions. They reached a door at the end of the hall, and Yun knocked once before entering. The room was small, dimly lit, with only a single desk lamp casting light on the occupants. At the desk sat Kong Jinho, his face unreadable. "Take a seat, Miss Thompson," Kong said, his voice smooth but with an edge that made her stomach drop. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she placed them on her lap. This was it. She was at the mercy of a man who had used her and discarded her like a tool. Kong leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the surface of the desk. "You've been doing well," he said, his gaze piercing. "But now things are about to get more complicated." Jade's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Kong's smile was cold, predatory. "We've been watching you, Miss Thompson. Watching your every move." Jade's breath caught in her throat. This was it. She had been played, and now there was no way out. The tension in the air was suffocating, thicker than the layers of secrets that surrounded her. Jade sat there in front of Kong Jinho, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, her stomach churning. The walls of his study seemed to close in around her, as though the room itself was a prison meant to trap her, to keep her locked away forever. Kong leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't make mistakes, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice smooth, but there was a coldness behind it that made her shiver. "And I don't trust easily. But I've been watching you, how you move, how you think. You're clever. Too clever." Jade's heart pounded in her chest. She had to stay calm. She had to keep her composure. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I didn't want to get involved in your mess. I was just trying to survive. I was just trying to take care of my baby." Kong's lips curled into a thin smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. "Survival," he mused. "We all have our ways of surviving, Miss Thompson. Some of us choose to play the game. Others get caught in it." Jade's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance igniting inside her. She had been caught, yes, but she wasn't going to let Kong Jinho control her life any longer. She wasn't going to let him dictate what happened to her or her child. "You've used me," she said, her voice firmer now. "You've used me like a pawn, a tool to get what you want. But I'm not your pawn anymore. I'm not going to be part of your games." Kong's eyes darkened, his expression shifting. "You think you have a choice?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can walk away from this?" For a brief moment, Jade's confidence wavered. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the power he wielded, and for a second, she wondered if she could make it out of here alive. But then she thought of her daughter. How far she had come already, how far she still had to go. She had to protect her. She had to protect them both. "No," Jade said, her voice steady now, determined. "I don't think I can walk away. But I can make a choice. I can choose to fight back. I can choose to do what's right." Kong stared at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Jade could feel her pulse pounding in her throat, but she didn't back down. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Very well," Kong said at last, his voice soft but laced with danger. Then it's time for you to make the ultimate choice. Jade's heart raced. What did he mean by that? What choice was he talking about? Before she could ask, the door to the study opened with a soft creak, and Yoon Ji-hoon stepped inside, his face as stone-cold as ever. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood the man with the dark eyes. The one who had been watching her since that first night at the casino. The one who had made her feel like prey. And now, here he was, standing in Kong's private study, as if he belonged there. Jade's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than she could have ever imagined. Kong gestured toward the man with the dark eyes. Meet Park Ju-hyun, he said. He's been a part of this organization for a long time. But he's not on our side anymore. Park Ju-hyun's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a predator gives when it knows it has its prey, right where it wants it. I'm sure you've heard of me, he said, his voice low, almost like a purr. I've been watching you, Miss Thompson. You're more useful than you think. Jade's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had feared. The moment she had tried to avoid. She was trapped, and now she had no way out. But then, something inside her snapped. Fear had been holding her back for too long. Fear had kept her quiet, kept her in the shadows, kept her from making a move. But now she wasn't afraid. She had nothing left to lose. You're wrong, she said, her voice calm and unwavering. I'm not your pawn. I'm not anyone's pawn. Park Ju-hyun's eyes flashed with irritation, and for a moment, Jade thought he might lunge at her. But Kong raised a hand, stopping him. She's right, Kong said, his voice cold. She's no longer useful to us. But she might be useful to someone else. I've made my decision. It's time to end this. And if she doesn't want to play by the rules, he shrugged, then she's no longer part of the game. Jade's breath caught in her throat. What did that mean? Was he going to have her killed? Was this the end? But then Kong's gaze softened just a fraction, and for the briefest moment, Jade saw something human flicker in his eyes. Regret? Guilt? It was gone before she could be sure. I don't want to kill you, Miss Thompson, Kong said, his voice quieter now. But if you keep pushing me, I will. She felt the air in the room grow colder, but something inside her clicked into place. She wasn't going to die here, not tonight. Not while her daughter was still inside her. Not while she still had a chance to escape. And that's when she made her move. In one swift motion, Jade stood up, her eyes locked on Kong. If you want to kill me, go ahead, she said, her voice steady. But you won't break me. You'll never break me. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Park Ju-hyun's smug smile faded as he took a step back, his eyes narrowing. Yun's hand hovered near his weapon, but he didn't move. Kong studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, he lowered his gaze. You have spirit, he said softly. I'll give you that. The tension in the room lifted, just slightly, but Jade knew that the game wasn't over. Not yet. But she had made it through this round. She had survived. And that was enough for now. I'll give you one last chance, Kong said, his voice low and almost contemplative. Walk away. Leave Korea. I'll even give you money, a new identity. You and your child can disappear. You'll be free. Jade's heart pounded in her chest, and for the briefest moment, the temptation to take his offer washed over her. A new life, a fresh start, away from all of this. But then she thought of everything she had gone through. The lies. The manipulation. The betrayal. She couldn't walk away from this. Not now. No, she said firmly. I don't want your money. I don't want your new life. I want my life back. I want my freedom. Kong nodded slowly, almost as if he expected this. Very well, he said softly. Then this is where our paths diverge. And just like that, the door to her freedom swung open. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But Jade was ready. With her baby inside her, and the future in her hands, she walked out of the room with her head held high, the weight of the past finally falling away. And for the first time in weeks, Jade knew she was free. Love you all, and Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to support our growth, and stay tuned for more amazing stories. And remember, it's never too late to change and do good in the world. Until next time, take care of each other.